The station to the left, 88.5 FM WMNF. Tampa.
Join us at Wavemakers Live with me, Shelley Reback, your host of Midpoint, on April 8th at the Commodore, with Robert Fiesler, historian and author of the multiple award-winning book, American Scare, Florida's Hidden Cold War on Black and Queer Lives. Robert is a very engaging speaker, and he'll be in conversation with me on Wednesday, April 8th at 7 p.m. at the Commodore. Tickets are $10 in advance, $15 at the door, and you can get your tickets on the event page at WMNF.org. I hope to see you there.
Thank you for joining me here on WMNF Radio 88.5 FM. This is the public affairs program called Community Speaks, and I'm your host, Patro Mabili. The best and the worst of us is on display today. The astronauts rocket around the moon. They left Florida today. Victor Glover is the African-American pilot for this trip, and Christina Koch is the mission specialist, the only woman on this mission. They are represented today. Their 10-day mission begins today with Artemis 2 set to go around the moon while also going the furthest in the space of any humans in history. That's pretty good. But also, the dumb war waged by the U.S. and it's not real against Iran will take another unhinged turn next hour when POTUS speaks to the nation again. POTUS has no idea how to end things. Week 1, he said we won. Week 2, we're going to win. Week 3, we're winning. Week 4, send help. Now he doesn't know what he's doing. After cussing and raging online to bomb Iran back into the Stone Age, it is clear he is the worst POTUS ever. The POTUS is in for a rude awakening as the war is fast becoming a currency war. Iran is now demanding payment in Chinese yuan or stablecoin. This represents another miscalculation by the POTUS and a potential to replace the dollar as the international reserve currency. And also, today in history, we commemorate the New York slave revolt of 1712, the Forgotten Rebellion. This is a rebellion that shook colonial America, unlike slavery in the South, which concentrated the enslaved in the fields of the plantation in the North. The enslaved worked in various jobs in a more urban setting and lived among free blacks. The prevalent accepted myth is that enslaved Africans in North America pretty much docilely accepted their enslavement. The evidence is quite to the contrary. The number of revolts and runaways, especially in the North, are early and significant. The New York colonial legislature passed a law mandating the death penalty for any slave found 40 miles north of Albany, highlighting that early struggle and how it literally paved the way for what would, almost 100 years later, come to be known as the Underground Railroad. So stay tuned for that and music to make you think. In next hour, we'll get back to the music with It's the Music Monday. But right now, you're tuned to the Sunday Forum. Of course, this is my opportunity to talk to you. You can call me 813-239-9663. 813-239-9663. That's the number to call if you want to join in the discussion on those topics and more right here on Community Speaks. So we're going to deal with a couple of things, and one of the things that we haven't really heard much about is the petrodollar revolt that we are hearing about. The nation of Iran, in spite of its political problems at home, and with a lot of those who are in exile speaking out about how their loved ones are being detained in Iran right now in this international war against the United States, or the United States and Israel's war against Iran. Iran is holding a lot of the leverage right now in terms of the Strait of Hormuz, which is where a fifth of the world's oil flows through. And of course, if this POTUS had really actually been a student of history, he would have known not to start this conflict willy-nilly without a plan, because that's all Iran really has to do in order to keep some kind of leverage, not just bomb its neighbors who are helping the United States with allowing the United States to land bases there, but they are using the Strait of Hormuz as that leverage against nations who are they consider their enemy right now, and those who are helping the United States and Israel conduct this unplanned war, an unnecessary war, because there was agreement with Iran all this time until the first term of this POTUS, and now again with the second term of this POTUS, we are seeing them trying to tear up any agreements and stability that we had in blowing it all up in front of your very eyes. So right now, Iran is, I'm being told, reportedly is imposing transit fees on vessels that are passing through the strait and collecting part of the charges in Chinese yuan and stable coins. And that's according to a Bloomberg report, even though the sources were anonymous. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard is effectively exercising control by demanding payment as a condition of granting passage permission to ships transiting the strait, and ship operators must submit vessels information and cargo details through intermediaries linked to the IRGC before negotiating passage terms. So this is just the beginning of this currency war. The transit fee typically starts at about $1 per barrel of crude oil, with payments reportedly made in yuan or stable coins now. And Iran is applying differentiated passage terms based on the level of friendliness by country, offering favorable terms to vessels from friendly nations while imposing passage restrictions or issuing attack threats against vessels from hostile countries. And this is according to the report. So this is leverage, but leverage that any student of history would have already known about before launching the conflict with Iran. Vessels that pay are assigned a passage code and route and then pass through the strait under escort by the Iranian Navy. And so we're seeing that there are some ships getting through and many others that are not, because we know the Strait of Hormuz, this is a critical route through which 20% of the global seaborne crude oil and liquefied natural gas volumes pass through, and this move is fueling unease in the global energy markets. So this is something we have to keep an eye on, but we're going to hear how much of this the president understands, and when he addresses you and me next hour, if you bother to watch. I'm not even just exactly sure, because the last time he addressed a few days ago the nation, he didn't say anything new, and his reportedly, I don't go to his page, but on his social media, apparently he's just cussing everybody out, which is probably the amount of his vocabulary. 813-239-9663. I'm anxious to talk to you about those issues as well as other issues. If you want to bring them up, if it's within the norms of what we're already discussing in terms of the best of us and the worst of us. And we're seeing that we're getting back into space and trying to find out as much as we can scientifically. There's still people who love science and want to learn from science, not make things up. So we're watching the voyage through around the moon, which a lot of people see as at least a bit of good news for humanity right now. But what we're seeing in the economy and the global relationships, things are not looking good at all. And we have to talk about it, because there are people who understood what would happen before it happened because of history. But if, as I said, if you're not a student of history, you're not going to know. In the meantime, we're seeing conflict continue in Ukraine. There was some drone attacks on oil infrastructure, and we're seeing the same kind of threats on oil infrastructure in the U.S. and Israel's war on Iran, as Israel has also struck some installations in this conflict in Iran, and people are saying that this too is a war crime. It would have been a war crime even if the United States had done it. It's been also threatening to do it, but instead of waiting to see if POTUS would do it, Israel has already attacked a major petrochemical plant, the South Pars natural gas field, today, and killed a top Revolutionary Guard commander while vowing to hunt down more top officials. So, doing that means all bets are off on your leaders. And we've seen constant killing of the leaders of Iran. What's to stop them from doing that to anybody else? So going down that road is not a good look for anybody who sees himself as an intelligent leader, as a stable genius. He's not acting like one. He's acting like he's unhinged. And what are we going to do about it? What is the Congress going to do about it? Which always raises the idea of the election that we're going to see happen this year. We're in an election year for Congress, and people are very disappointed in this Congress for not doing anything to stop this president. And of course, as commander-in-chief, he can make decisions. He has war powers, but that's supposed to be limited to 60 days. We're not seeing the Congress raise a hand to do anything right now, to at least sign on to this conflict or to stop this conflict, since it does control the purse. And it looks like Iran is already rejecting the latest ceasefire proposal. And instead, it says it wants a permanent end to the war, not just this kick it down the road where we'll stop for 45 days. They, of course, want a permanent end to the war. And the POTUS's ultimatum loomed to avoid a major escalation in attacks against power plants and bridges. We'll see if he maintains that level of threat in his speech next hour. Some of us will be listening to the music. We'll be getting back to the music because, I'll probably be one of them, since I don't expect anything new to happen, but I do hope we can avoid any further escalation in this conflict, even though that's exactly what the POTUS is threatening. And he wants to give them another 24 hours. He said 48 hours, so that was a day ago. Another 24 hours for Iran to open the Straits of Hormuz or face an attack on your power plants and bridges. And as I said, Iran has rejected this 45-day pause and the reopening of the strait, saying they want a permanent end to the war. But what do we want? What do you want? 813-239-9663. 813-239-9663. I'm eager to see how you're doing in the run-up to this speech and what is happening on the global stage right now in your name. It's important for us to understand, from each other what is going on. How are you digesting all of this? 813-239-9663 is the number to call. So many things to talk about. But of course, as I said, the best and the worst of us on display. But today in history was one of the worst, depending on how you look at it. If it's a uprising against slavery, that's a good thing. But, there were a lot of times when people, rose up and it didn't get as much coverage. And one of those forgotten revolts was the revolt in New York after the seizure of the Dutch colony of New Netherlands by the English in 1664 and its incorporation into the province of New York. The rights of the Free Negro social group were gradually eroded, and in 1702, the first of the New York slave codes were passed, in which this further limited the rights enjoyed by the African community in New York. And many of these legal rights, such as the right to own land, the right to marry, those rights were granted during the Dutch colonial period. On December the 13th, 1711, the New York City Common Council established the city's first slave market near Wall Street for the sale and rental of enslaved Africans and Native Americans. And by the early 1700s, about 20% of the population were enslaved black people. The colonial government in New York restricted this group through several measures, requiring slaves to carry a pass if traveling more than a mile from home, discouraging marriage among them, and prohibiting gatherings in groups of more than 3 persons, and requiring them to sit in separate galleries at church services. This was long before separate but equal. And a group of more than 20 black slaves, the majority of whom were believed to be Coromantee or Akan, gathered on the night of April 6th, 1712, and set fire to a building near Broadway. So that was the scene as the start of the New York Slave Revolt in 1712. Let's go back and remember this forgotten revolt here on Community Speaks as you go to the telephones and call to talk about what is happening today. 813-239-9662, or you can write me, DJ at WMNF.org.
Thus, the New York Slave Revolt of 1712, one of the earliest recorded uprisings of enslaved people in the colonial Americas. We will also think about how this historical event connects to themes regarding slavery in the northeastern United States and how it would eventually create the momentum needed to eventually abolish slavery in the state of New York. For context, the first successful revolution of enslaved people in the Americas was in 1790 in Saint Domingue, what would become the country of Haiti. So this moment in 1712 in New York truly was an important revolutionary moment, indicating that those who were enslaved would always continue to resist systems of oppression. Slavery in New York had deep roots. While often associated with the southern United States, slavery was central to the economy of the Northeast as well. The Dutch first brought enslaved Africans to the colony of New Netherland in 1626. When the English took control and renamed it New York in 1664, the system of slavery expanded. By the early 18th century, nearly 1 in every 5 people in New York City was enslaved. Enslaved individuals worked in homes, on docks, and in shipyards and on farms. New York was different from the South in that enslaved people were often concentrated in urban areas. In this narrative, I am going to focus primarily on New York City, although much of the enslaved population was also concentrated in other big settlements of New York State, although the main one would be New York City. By the early 1700s, New York had the largest population of enslaved people in the North. In 1703, about 42% of households in New York City enslaved at least one person, usually 1 or 2, compared to 6% of households in Philadelphia and 2% in Boston. This was a higher percentage than any other city in the country, except for Charleston, South Carolina. Enslaved laborers were crucial to the city's economy, working in construction, shipbuilding, agriculture, and as household servants. This created unique conditions for resistance. The city's enslaved population lived close to one another, interacted with free black people and other laborers, and had opportunities to organize in ways that were harder on isolated plantations in the South. Therefore, the urban space in which the enslaved of New York City existed is a critical part of this story. Despite being a province in the North, New York did have strict laws that controlled black people's movements and actions. In 1702, the colony passed a law that gave harsh punishments for enslaved people accused of violence against their enslavers. This was the state's first comprehensive slave code, under the English, not the Dutch, consisting of 6 major clauses clarifying the legal status of the growing enslaved population of the province. For example, one clause stated, "Free men are forbidden from engaging in trade with enslaved people at risk of being fined £5. Another one said, "Slave owners are granted the authority to punish their slaves in whatever way they see fit, barring any risk to life or limb." And another one said, "Enslaved peoples are forbidden from congregating in groups of more than 3 people, except in cases where it is required by their work or otherwise sanctioned by their enslaver. Violation of this statute can result in a punishment of up to 40 lashes." And lastly, another clause stated, "Enslaved people are no longer permitted to testify in a court of law, except in cases directly relating to another enslaved person." Another law, 4 years later, in 1706, made it harder for enslaved people to gain freedom. These laws created an environment of oppression and fear. This specific law ruled that owners did not need to free a baptized enslaved person. The same law ruled that any child born to an enslaved mother was to be enslaved for life. In combination with poor working conditions, these laws and the constant threat of violence created a climate of unrest amongst the enslaved population of New York. Likewise, New York's economy in the 18th century was deeply connected to the trade in enslaved people and the goods they produced, such as sugar, tobacco, indigo, coffee, chocolate, and later cotton, all across the world. Local ship captains and merchants were actively involved in buying and selling enslaved individuals, both along the African coast and within the city's taverns. At some point, nearly every businessman in New York had a financial interest in the trafficking of human beings. So the extent of slavery in New York not only included the enslaved living within New York State, but also those enslaved in the South, whom New York financiers were heavily invested in. By 1712, tensions had reached a breaking point. On the night of April 6th or April 7th, the dates differ depending on the source, a group of about 20 or 24 enslaved people set fire to a building in the city center. As white colonists rushed to put out the flames, the rebels attacked with weapons, killing 9 people and injuring several others. The response was brutal. Authorities captured and executed more than 20 of the rebels. Some were burned alive, while others were hanged or tortured. 6 committed suicide before they were apprehended. While the slave revolt of 1712, which happened in New York City, itself as an event is rather short, the context in which it occurred, as I have just spent the last few minutes going over, and the aftermath, which I will speak to now, is important. Rather than reconsidering the institution of slavery and the racial hierarchy it upheld, to understand the grievances of those who were enslaved and who formulated the revolution, New York authorities responded to the revolt by reinforcing both the institution of slavery and the racial hierarchy. Laws were enacted to further restrict the lives of enslaved people, including prohibiting gatherings of more than 3 individuals and making the process of manumission more difficult for those who are enslaved. As a result, slavery remained entrenched in New York for many, many more years. It wasn't until 1799 that legislation was passed to initiate the gradual abolition of slavery in the state of New York. However, before going into the specifics of how gradual abolition functioned in the state after 1799, it is important to look at events that occurred directly after the 1712 revolt. Specifically, as I mentioned, after the revolt, the state decided to implement harsher laws. In 1715, for example, the state passed even more restrictions, restricting the ability for enslaved people to gather in groups because they feared further revolts. Punishments for rebellion also became even more severe as a form of deterrence. However, instead of weakening resistance, these laws fueled even more unrest. Another major slave conspiracy was uncovered in 1741, resulting in mass arrests and executions. In 1741, economic hardships in New York City heightened tensions between enslaved individuals involved in commerce and working-class white colonists who feared losing their jobs to those who were enslaved. These conflicts escalated in the spring of that year when a series of fires broke out, sparking widespread panic among white residents who suspected an organized rebellion by enslaved people, as they had the example of the 1712 revolt in the back of their minds. One of the most significant fires destroyed Fort George in Lower Manhattan. The events that followed became known as the New York Conspiracy of 1741 or the Slave Insurrection. Nearly 200 people were arrested, including at least 20 white individuals, some of whom were accused of being Catholic spies. To illustrate the class conflict dynamic of this conspiracy, the prosecution of the conspiracy relied heavily on the testimony of a woman named Mary Burden, a 16-year-old Irish indentured servant who was incentivized with the promise of a substantial reward. Her statements were often inconsistent, with new details emerging only under pressure. The alleged conspiracy was framed as an attempt by white conspirators to seize control of the city government, aided by enslaved people who were supposedly promised their freedom in exchange for their participation. This illustrates the ways in which white people saw authentic slave revolts as inconceivable. However, this event demonstrates that the slave revolt of 1712 was only the beginning of these tensions that would eventually lead to the abolition of slavery across New York State, but also speaks to the authentic nature of the revolts that were often inspired and co-created by those very enslaved people. Another very important lesson to draw from the revolt of 1712 is to highlight the fact that slavery was not just a Southern institution. It was deeply embedded in the economy and society of the North. It shows that enslaved people resisted their oppression at every opportunity, often at great personal cost, knowing the punishments they would face were they caught. Even in this area of the supposedly free North, they felt themselves pushed to revolt. We are often taught in stories of Southern enslaved people who had to seek their freedom through escape to the North, through means like the Underground Railroad. However, enslaved people in the North themselves, specifically in this moment of the 18th century, also had to find their way to freedom. I also want to think about whether or not we can conceive of these revolts as successful. They may not have been successful for the individuals who partook in them. However, the long-run story of the abolition of slavery in New York State tells a slightly different narrative. Slavery in New York continued for more than a century after the revolt. However, pressure from abolitionists, including free black activists and religious groups, gradually led to change. In 1799, as I mentioned earlier, New York passed a gradual emancipation law, freeing children born into slavery after that date, though they were still required to work as indentured servants for years. The law specifically said that children born to enslaved mothers after July 4th, 1799 were considered free. However, male children had to serve their mother's masters until they were 28, and female children had to serve them until they were 25. Thereafter, they would only be free after the slave owner manumitted them by signing a certificate. In 1817, New York passed another law that set 1827 as the year of final emancipation. Full abolition came on July 4th, 1827, when all remaining enslaved people in New York were officially freed. This does not make New York the first state to abolish slavery, not even close, but it did put it ahead of the nation. One can only think that revolts like that of 1712, which shook the security of white masters in New York, played a role. Of course, we know that slavery across the nation did not end until 1865, after the Civil War, with the passing of the 13th Amendment on December 6, 1865. And even then, some individuals remained enslaved until later dates. That is why Juneteenth is celebrated now as a national holiday since 2021. Juneteenth celebrates the emancipation of enslaved African Americans in the United States. It marks June 19, 1865, when Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, and announced that all enslaved people were free, more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. It is therefore often recognized as the final bastion of slavery to have ended. While it is difficult to draw direct lines of correlation, such as the Revolt of 1712 directly to abolition in the state, it is important to conclude by thinking of the Slave Revolt of 1712 as a reminder that the struggle for freedom was a constant battle in which people risked their own safeties, their own lives, to ensure that the establishment of slavery, the institution of slavery, never felt safe. Enslaved people resisted in many different ways, both large and small, and this revolt is only one example of the various ways in which they resisted. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Black History Matters 2025.
Yeah, thank you for listening to that here on Community Speaks. That was a short history of the New York Slave Revolt in 1712 and its aftermath. And in my opinion, the aftermath continues to this day as we see attempts at weakening people's voting rights and people's citizenship. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who believe still that descendants of the enslaved were not citizens. And maybe the 14th Amendment was an attempt at rectifying that, but still to this day, there are attempts to suppress all of the rights of citizens in this country, even those who had been here all of these centuries. And one of the things that continues to show that is, of course, we see now the POTUS in his war on birthright citizenship. And we see the history of how the history of slavery used birthright, the being born to an enslaved mother as a reason to continue enslavement for the next generation, hereditary enslavement. And after the abolition, of course, we saw attempts at weakening your voting rights. When they couldn't prevent you from becoming citizens, your voting rights were weakened. And we continue to see voter suppression continue to happen, not revolt suppression, but voter suppression. But even when there are uprisings to this day, we see an attempt at violent suppression of people of color when they are in the streets protesting, even protesting peacefully. And we see suppressing voter suppression bills attempted in the red states, in these conservative states, but also at the national level by this POTUS, the so-called Save America Act. And of course, that would end voter registration drives nationwide, which is the way during the period of Jim Crow in this country, which immediately followed Reconstruction after the Civil War, which ended slavery. There's a through line with the attempts at suppressing people's rights inside this country, the so-called land of the free. And POTUS's Save America Act, as I said, would end voter registration, but voter registration is the first step at empowerment and for the voter. And that being attacked is exactly what people like the League of Women Voters are trying to reverse We're seeing this happen in the Midwest, in the South, all over in these red states. Before Wyoming's election, the state's League of Women Voters tried to get voter registration information into the hands of residents at events and gatherings, but under state law, League volunteers can't sign up voters themselves. Only local election officials can do that. So something as small as who's signing you up is part of what's being suppressed right now. The Save America Act would ban voter registration drives, which is a mainstay of college campuses and neighborhood events. And the U.S. Senate began debating a version of POTUS's signature elections measure last month after the House passed it in February. But we also saw an attempt here in the state of Florida to pass Florida's version of the Save America Act, just as we saw Florida's version of the Department of Government Efficiency, the DOGE, which was a fake outfit that cost a lot of jobs unnecessarily, needlessly, federal jobs. And now the Congress is struggling, trying to figure out how to pay the people who are still working, who were essential workers. So the more they work at suppressing us, the worse they hurt the country as a whole. Democratic states have sued the POTUS over mail-in ballots, joining to rush to the courts. DeSantis has signed a bill requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote. And so, of course, voting rights groups are suing the governor for that as need to. 813-239-9663. This is Community Speaks. I'm your host, Patrick Mobili, covering the best and the worst of us today and historically, and taking your telephone calls. I'm going to go to Sarasota and speak with Rose here on Community Speaks as you go to your telephones and join Rose from Sarasota in this discussion. You can also write me, DJ at WNF.org. Thank you, Rose, for calling Community Speaks. You say what?
Hey, it's actually Rosie V, but
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's actually Rosie V. I just wanted to say that, yeah, Trump is the problem, but the real underlying problem is the Congress. They're all complicit, in my opinion. The Democrats and the Republicans are letting the corruption and him do whatever he wants. They just are just so complicit, and it's, boy, they're the ones who are going to really pay for it when this all sort of sorts out and it disappears. They're the ones who are going to take the brutal punch of it all.
Yeah, but it seems like the onus falls on the Republicans, since there are so many party line votes to try to hold the president accountable.
Yeah. Look at one thing. Look at the money that even the Democrats are pouring into their pockets too.
I'm not sure what you mean, but I think I understand.
This whole thing with when they all sort of get tipped off when the stock market's going to go up and down, and they all seem to be putting in money, and they all seem to be making money off of the stock market.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just saying it's all of them. That's really kind of what I'm saying. I feel, my opinion is, they're all complicit to it because, you know, someone needs to stand up to this guy, and there's no one who wants to do it.
Yeah, it's going to fall to the voters. It's definitely on the voters right now.
Oh, yeah. The voters are going to take them all out, for sure.
If we don't have so much suppression, because the suppression is real right now.
Right. And also the media is terrified to report anything, you know.
Yeah, they're coming after the media. They come after us, the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, but that hasn't stopped us.
No, I know, and hasn't stopped PBS and a lot of other places too. Mm-hmm. But they're pushing for control over all the media, and that's the sad part. And of course, as we know, Fox News is like the biggest Himmler propaganda ever.
Yeah, that's clear.
Yeah.
But thank you for your call.
Thank you for bringing this out. We really need to hear it. More people need to hear it. So thank you for your words.
You're definitely welcome. Thank you for calling.
Have a great day. All right.
Sarasota.
Bye-bye.
And
Congress is a problem when they are sitting on their hands right now, afraid to act, afraid to move, and afraid of the billionaire dollars that are funding their campaigns. In the meantime, this Florida's new Show Your Papers law is considered a blatant attempt to add unnecessary barriers to the ballot box because those in power want to entrench themselves by hurting your ability to vote. And, just minutes after signing this bill, a coalition of voting rights advocates filed a federal lawsuit challenging the new Law to Save America Act, arguing it would disenfranchise eligible voters and create unnecessary barriers to the franchise, which was the point. They noted that thousands of Floridians lack ready access to these documents like birth certificates, valid passports. They have to produce evidence of citizenship now, not just a driver's license anymore, I suppose. That's what the whole point of House Bill 991 that the governor signed into law this past Wednesday and approved by the Florida legislature last month. And just minutes later, a federal lawsuit was filed, which should happen, how it should happen. So the Show Your Papers law is what is being called. This law that targets Florida's vulnerable voters, like older black voters who grew up in the Jim Crow South, naturalized citizens, transgendered people, low-income voters, voters with disabilities, all in service of perpetuating the fact-free myth of widespread non-citizen registration in voting. It's never been proven to be a problem, but yet they're passing these voter suppression laws as if it has been such a major problem, something that is less than 1/2% of a problem, does not require this level of attention from the law and these types of voter suppression laws. We're going to go to St. Pete, as you call, 813-239-9663. Of course, next hour, we're going to hear from the president. But if you stay tuned here, you're going to get back to the music with It's the Music Monday. So we're going to go to St. Pete and talk to Mike. Thank you for calling Community Speaks. You want to talk about international courts. Thank you for calling, Mike.
All right. Yes. I've been thinking about Milosevic, the war criminal from Yugoslavia, and how Trump parallels his path only on a much larger scale. It's clear to everyone who's thinking about it that Trump has violated international law, crimes against humanity, war crimes, as defined in the Rome Statute in the 1990s. He should be made to stand trial at the Hague, at the International Criminal Court. And I think that even though we don't belong to that out of, I don't know what, cowardice, I guess, but I still believe that it's possible for the next administrations to arrest Trump and extradite him to the Hague, where he should stand trial in the proper place. That would do a lot to salvage our damaged reputation in the international community.
Right. I mean, we've heard similar calls. Remember after the lie that was told to get us into the Iraqi war, and how people said that if Rumsfeld, who was the defense secretary at the time, traveled anywhere, he could be arrested and sent to the international court, which is probably why we're not a member to this day.
Well, we have too many people to protect.
Yeah.
From charges of crimes against humanity. And those crimes are well defined in international law, and the violations are clear.
Right.
We just have to have the nerve as a people to do it.
That, which will also have to include Israel. When you look at the crimes we're talking about, when they hit the natural South Pars gas field, This is
Yes.
could lead to a lot of people going without necessary gas in order to warm their homes or whatever. That's a crime against humanity.
Well, yes. Netanyahu and his enablers in their defense cabinet, they also should be brought to trial in The Hague. And as I understand it, Netanyahu has already been indicted by the International Criminal Court. Getting him there would be a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, good points today, and keep up the good work.
Thank you for calling. Thank you for calling to Community Speaks.
You bet.
We'll keep an eye on this, on whether or not we're going to see some justice in the International Criminal Court. Thank you for calling, Mike. 813-239-9663. As we are talking about the international situation right now, as I said, Iran is rejecting the ceasefire proposal of 45 days after POTUS warned Iran that the U.S. could set the country back to the Stone Age. And we talk about crimes against humanity. He's talking about bombing bridges and power plants if they don't cry uncle, as he puts it. They won't have no bridges, no power plants, no anything, as he says of Iran. And he's also threatened to go further. He quoted, "If I had my choice, what would I like to do? Take the oil." So he's trying to enrich himself, which was probably part of the point from the beginning. He just doesn't understand how the world works, so he didn't expect to be bogged down as he is right now. He even says that, unfortunately, the American people would like to see us come home. So why is that unfortunate? So he's all over the place. I don't know if you're going to listen next hour. I guess I have to, but I can't wait to get back to the music. Right now, you're tuned to Community Speaks as I speak with you. If you call 813-239-9663, we're talking about resistance in history and resistance today, but also at the ballot box, and also the international situation of the potential for this country and its POTUS engaging in war crimes while the Congress twiddles its thumb and says nothing. 813-239-9663. You tuned to Community Speaks. I'm going to go and speak with Margaret. Thank you for calling, Margaret. You say what?
Hi. I want to comment on, you said that there has never been a problem before as far as identification when voting.
Oh, okay.
It's simply because people were getting away with all of this criminal stuff. People were let in the country undocumented, voting undocumented. And so I don't see the problem now with getting people to get identification to make sure you are rightfully voting. So
Yeah.
I don't know why people are making a big deal out of that.
Because it's never been a problem. It hasn't been a problem. I mean, there's no proof that they've been coming to the country voting as illegal, undocumented persons.
It's a lot of that been going on, and people just were getting away with it. But now they don't want to be held accountable for it. So now they want to make a big fuss about it. And I'm glad that I hope it happens that we have to prove who we are and where we're from.
I remember I've been voting since the late 1980s. I've always shown an ID. What is happening is these laws are saying that some of those IDs are just not good enough anymore without proof that it's been a problem.
Your driver's license alone does not say that you are documented to be in this country. So that's why it needs to be done.
All right.
They've gotten away with all this undocumented, illegal fraud and stuff for so long, and we need to straighten it out.
All right. And you think these laws will straighten it out?
I hope so. I can't say until it happens.
All right. That's true.
I believe it'll help anyway.
Okay, that's possible. I mean, if it were a big problem, maybe to the extent that it was a small problem, it'll help that. So you may be right about that.
Well, the bottom line is a problem.
All right.
And it needs to be straightened out. There's so much fraud going on every kind of way in this country, and we need to do something to correct it.
Okay, well, we'll see, Margaret. We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see how many. Thank you. We'll see how many people will not be allowed to vote, or how many people's vote won't count, and whether or not these laws are actually going to grow the problem that it claims is the problem, or wasn't the problem, that it was undocumented persons voting and maybe turning the real vote in a certain direction. There's been no proof that has been the case, but we'll see if more people are going to be thrown out, if their votes are going to be thrown out because the way they prove their right to vote as a citizen is no longer those ways, those IDs no longer be enough or accepted, or if they don't provide the ID that is being demanded in these laws, such as birth certificates. We'll see if more votes are suppressed than were suppressed before, and whether or not this turns elections. We'll see, Margaret. We'll definitely see. But a lot of people have already shown that voter suppression in these laws were not necessary because it wasn't the level of problem that you claim it was, or that these laws, or people who are promulgating these laws, claim that it was. We're going to go to Brandon. And Brandon, you're probably going to be the last call. Thank you for calling, Jason from Brandon.
That's cool. I'm all right with taking that one. It's funny you mentioned Slobodan Milosevic, because Donald Trump may just be his doppelganger, albeit a few years later. And the perfect lyric for Donald Trump is, You may be right. I may be crazy. But you may just be a lunatic. It may just be a lunatic you're looking for.
Huh. Well, we'll see. Thank you for calling.
Say, show us the rivers, please show us the land, and we, with the hearts of the warm summer sun, we welcome the strangers. We didn't see the gun. They wrote in their diaries, they measured the stone, they smiled at our children, they sat in our home. We offered them water, we offered them bread, but they were counting the gold underneath where we tread. It was psychological warfare, dressed up as a friend, the beginning of a story we didn't know would end. The explorer mapped the mountain and the mineral, the missionary mapped the spirit and the mind, the merchant mapped the market and the capital, and left the freedom of our fathers far behind. They told us, look up to the heavens, let your worries stay. While they were down in the dirt, taking everything we made, they said, turn the other cheek, wait for the promised land. We closed our eyes to pray, and they stole the sand. No, the ancestors didn't fail, they were ambushed by grace. They brought a war in a smile to a peaceful place. Before we could even say amen, the chains were already on the wrists of the men. They walked up the wall.
That is music from USL, the Blueprint. That's Afro Soul in Community Speaks here today. We'll be hearing more of that type of music, but stay tuned. We're going to get back to the music here on WMNF Radio 88.5 FM. This has been Community Speaks. Thank you for your phone calls. Thank you for your emails. Thank you, Sage, for taking the telephone calls. And Blandon Whalen comes your way next as we get back to the music here on WMNF Tampa. We got to get a news update from The Source. And then back to the music here on WMNF.
This is The Scoop for Monday.
I'm Juanita Hurtado